Jasmine Crockett sat poised at the panel table, her eyes locked onto Karoline Leavitt with a look that blended disbelief and amusement. The debate had been relatively controlled until now, but as Karoline began discussing the foundations of the United States, mentioning the wrong year for the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the room seemed to shift. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife as she interrupted with a wry smile. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "but if you're going to lecture all of us on American values, maybe you should know when the country was actually founded." The audience gasped and some even chuckled, sensing that a storm was brewing right before their eyes. Karoline hesitated for a split second, blinking rapidly, trying to determine if she had actually made a mistake or if Crockett was bluffing. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted not just in Karoline's mind, but in the minds of everyone watching. Crockett didn't wait for a reply. She continued, her words sharp and deliberate. "It's really something," she said, shaking her head, "that someone who wants to represent the American people doesn't even know the basics of their own history. It's not just embarrassing, it's dangerous." The tension in the room crackled like static. Every camera zoomed in closer. Every journalist's pen scribbled faster. Karoline tried to smile, tried to laugh it off, but her confidence wavered, her usual polished demeanor starting to show cracks. Crockett picked up on it instantly. She leaned even closer, her voice lowering slightly but somehow becoming even more powerful, drawing everyone's attention like a magnet. "You know," Crockett said, almost whispering but with deadly precision, "it's one thing to have opinions. It's another to spread ignorance with a microphone in your hand." A low rumble of reaction spread across the crowd, a mix of murmurs, gasps, and quiet laughter. The moderator shifted in his seat, clearly sensing the moment spiraling beyond the planned format. But Crockett wasn't finished. She turned her body slightly to face Karoline fully, as if putting a spotlight directly on her opponent. "When you disrespect history, you disrespect every American who fought, bled, and died for the principles you're mangling up here tonight," she said, her tone suddenly serious, heavy with emotion that underscored her words with undeniable gravity. Karoline opened her mouth to respond, but Crockett raised a single hand, palm up, stopping her without even touching her. "No," Crockett said firmly, "it's not your turn to talk yet. It's your turn to listen." The crowd erupted into a mixture of cheers and scattered applause, breaking the moderator's attempts to regain control. Crockett took a breath and, sensing the moment was hers to own, delivered one final blow. "If you can't even get the past right, how in the world are you going to lead us into the future?" Karoline sat frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment, before she finally lowered her gaze to her notes. Crockett, meanwhile, leaned back in her chair, calm and composed, victorious in the first major clash of the evening. The audience buzzed with energy, whispering, texting, and posting about the unforgettable moment they had just witnessed. And in that one brutal, cutting exchange, the entire trajectory of the debate had been rewritten. Karoline Leavitt took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as she straightened the stack of papers in front of her. The sting of Jasmine Crockett's words still hung heavily in the air, and she knew she had to respond quickly if she wanted to salvage her credibility. Flashing a tight smile, Karoline leaned into her microphone and said, "Well, I think what's important here is the spirit of 1776 and the values that our founding fathers fought for." Her voice was calm at first, but a slight quiver betrayed her nerves. She continued, attempting to regain the audience's attention, "The Constitution was signed in 1776, and that's what has guided America for centuries." There it was, the mistake, plain and undeniable. A wave of murmuring swept across the crowd, louder this time. People leaned in, whispering to one another, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Cameras panned across the room, capturing the reactions, some people shaking their heads, others smirking, and a few visibly cringing. Jasmine Crockett cocked her head to the side, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing, her smile growing wider with every passing second. The moderator's eyes widened slightly, but he stayed silent, letting the moment unfold naturally. Karoline pressed on, her words gaining speed as if she believed momentum alone could erase the error. "And when we look at the leadership back then," she said, her voice growing sharper, "it's clear that they wanted a government free from interference, grounded in Christian values, and in the freedom that came from the 1776 signing of the U.S. Constitution." Another factual mistake, even worse than the first. The Constitution, of course, was signed in 1787, not 1776. It was basic American history, something any high school student could correct. The murmurs became a low roar, and the moderators shifted awkwardly at their desks. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, folding her arms with a knowing look, almost inviting Karoline to dig the hole even deeper. Karoline, sensing she was losing the room but unsure why, grew defensive. "I think the real problem," she said, raising her voice slightly, "is that people on the left don't respect the history of this nation. They want to rewrite it instead of honoring it." The crowd, once full of energy, now fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even her supporters struggled to applaud. Jasmine didn't say a word yet, she simply let the silence do the damage. Karoline shuffled her papers again, searching for her next point, but her mind raced. She could feel the sweat gathering at the back of her neck, the weight of the cameras and eyes and judgment pressing down harder with every second. She cleared her throat and smiled tightly, hoping to reset the energy, but the damage had already been done. Her credibility, once solid, now felt like it was built on sand. An older woman sitting in the front row shook her head slowly, whispering to the man next to her. In the back of the room, a group of college students exchanged glances and stifled laughter. Online, clips of Karoline's mistakes were already being clipped and shared. Viewers at home didn't even need to wait for fact checks, the errors were glaring and undeniable. The moderators, finally stepping in, moved to another question, but the moment lingered like a bad smell. Karoline sat silently for a moment longer, eyes flickering nervously to the moderator and back to Jasmine, who maintained her calm, almost amused demeanor. She knew that this was more than just a slip-up. It was the kind of error that could haunt a campaign, that could follow her through every future debate, every interview, every public appearance. No matter what she said next, the image of her confidently getting basic American history wrong would overshadow it. She forced herself to sit up straighter, to smile, to pretend that nothing had happened. But deep down, she knew she had handed Jasmine Crockett a powerful weapon. She had exposed not just a simple mistake, but a fundamental lack of preparation, a crack in the armor that could not easily be repaired. And the worst part was, everyone had seen it happen in real time. The moderator, sensing the tension mounting and the audience's growing unease, decided it was necessary to intervene. He adjusted his microphone, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "For the sake of clarity, let's quickly fact-check a few points mentioned." His words cut through the thick atmosphere of the room, commanding immediate attention. A large screen behind the panelists flickered to life, displaying a simple timeline of American history. At the top, in bold letters, the screen read, "Declaration of Independence 1776. U.S. Constitution 1787. The moderator continued, his tone measured but unmistakably firm. The Declaration of Independence was indeed signed in 1776. However, the U.S. Constitution, which established the framework of our government, was signed over a decade later, in 1787. He paused for a moment, letting the information sink in. The audience reacted immediately. There was a ripple of low laughter, a few surprised gasps, and more than a few knowing glances exchanged among the crowd. Karoline Leavitt's face tightened. Her forced smile faltered for a split second, betraying the realization that her mistake had now been broadcast, documented, and officially corrected for everyone to see. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp and unrelenting, clearly savoring the moment without needing to say a word. The moderator, trying to move things along, addressed the candidates neutrally, but everyone knew the fact check was aimed squarely at Karoline. In debates such as these, the moderator added diplomatically, "It's important we ground our discussions in accurate information. Let's move forward with that understanding." His attempt at smoothing over the situation barely registered, the damage was done. Viewers at home were already snapping screenshots of the fact-check graphic, sharing it across social media with captions mocking Karoline's blunder. Karoline, grasping for control, leaned forward and said into her microphone, "Look, whether it was 1776 or 1787, the point remains that America's foundation was built on freedom and faith." But her words felt hollow, desperate even. The specifics mattered here, and the audience knew it. History wasn't just a backdrop, it was the very heart of the debate tonight. By getting it wrong so confidently, she had shown a lack of seriousness that voters, commentators, and political opponents would seize upon mercilessly. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice low and devastatingly calm. "Details matter, Karoline," she said, the edges of her words razor sharp. "Especially when you're asking people to trust you with their future. If you don't respect the facts of the past, how can we trust you to protect the future?" The statement hit like a hammer. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it was absolute. It left no room for rebuttal, no easy exit from the hole Karoline had dug herself into. The moderator, Sensing the emotional crescendo, moved swiftly to the next question, but the room remained heavy with the fallout of what had just occurred. Cameras caught every flicker of discomfort across Karoline's face. She shifted slightly in her chair, fidgeting with a pen she wasn't using, her mind likely racing for a way to recover, a way to change the subject, anything to shift the spotlight off her historical error. Meanwhile, Crockett remained a picture of composure, her hands folded neatly on the table, her posture relaxed, exuding an air of competence and authority that contrasted sharply with Karoline's visible unease. In political debates, perception is everything, and tonight, perception had been turned sharply against Karoline Leavitt. Fact-checkers on Twitter, news analysts in their live coverage, and even casual viewers watching at home latched onto the moment. Memes were created within minutes, highlighting the contrast between Karoline's confidence and her glaring inaccuracies. Some posts even sarcastically offered free history lessons for political candidates. The story had already taken on a life of its own. Karoline's campaign team, sitting nervously at the edge of the audience, exchanged frantic whispers, knowing they would have a full-blown media crisis to handle by morning. But in that moment, under the stage lights and before the unblinking eyes of the public, there was nowhere to hide. The fact check had landed like a knockout punch. Even as the debate officially moved on, the psychological impact was impossible to ignore. Karoline forced herself to smile again, nodding along as the next topic was introduced, but the energy around her had shifted. She was no longer the confident challenger. She was the candidate who had been schooled, on live television, on the basic facts of the nation she aspired to lead. And no matter what words were spoken for the rest of the evening, that reality lingered, louder and more devastating than anything else. Karoline Leavitt sat frozen for a moment, her mind racing through every possible strategy to regain control of the situation. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, the weight of judgment bearing down on her from the audience, from the cameras, from her opponent sitting across the stage with that maddening look of calm confidence. But Karoline wasn't about to just sit there and let herself be humiliated. She straightened her posture, forced a smile onto her lips, and leaned back into her microphone with newfound determination. "You know," Karoline began, her voice steadier now but still carrying the faintest tremor, "it's easy for career politicians to nitpick about dates and facts when they have nothing real to offer the American people." She paused, glancing around the room, daring anyone to challenge her shift in direction. "What matters most," she continued, "is that we understand the values our country was founded on. Freedom, opportunity, responsibility. That's the America I'm fighting for." There was a smattering of polite applause from a few of her supporters in the crowd, but the majority of the room remained silent, still digesting the blunder that had just taken place. Karoline plowed ahead anyway, sensing that stopping would only make things worse. "While some are more concerned with scoring cheap shots," she said, shooting a pointed look at Jasmine Crockett, "I'm focused on real issues, lowering taxes, securing our borders, protecting our families." Her voice grew stronger, fueled by sheer willpower. For a brief moment, it seemed like Karoline might be able to claw her way back into the debate. She spoke passionately about her plans to revitalize American manufacturing, her vision for strengthening education without government overreach, her commitment to defending constitutional rights. She painted a picture of a bold, proud America, a future unburdened by bureaucracy and political correctness. Her words were practiced, honed from months of campaigning, and they began to roll off her tongue more smoothly as she leaned into her rehearsed talking points. But even as she spoke, there was a noticeable disconnect. The audience listened, but the spark was missing. It was as if they were indulging her out of politeness rather than genuine engagement. The earlier mistake still hung in the air like an invisible barrier she couldn't quite break through. Every strong point she made felt slightly hollow, weighed down by the undeniable fact that her knowledge of the very foundations she claimed to defend had just been called into serious question. Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, allowing Karoline to speak uninterrupted, but the confidence on her face spoke volumes. She didn't need to interrupt. She didn't need to challenge. She knew the damage had already been done. Karoline's comeback, while passionate, felt reactive, desperate, like a boxer throwing wild punches after being knocked off balance. The crowd could sense it too. They could feel the difference between someone in control and someone scrambling to recover. Karoline pushed on, ending her impromptu speech with a rallying cry, "We need leaders who care more about our future than about political games." She held her arms out slightly, appealing to the audience for validation. A few loyal supporters clapped louder this time, trying to inject energy into the room, but it was clear the moment belonged to someone else now. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won an argument, she had seized the narrative. The moderator nodded politely and prepared to move to the next topic, offering Karoline a lifeline out of the increasingly awkward situation. But even as the discussion shifted toward healthcare policy, the lingering impression remained. Karoline had stumbled when it mattered most. She had tried to mask it with passion, with defiance, with sweeping patriotic rhetoric, but the crack in her armor had already been exposed to millions. As she answered the next question, her voice maintained its strength, her words stayed sharp, but behind her eyes, there was a different story, a flicker of doubt, a flash of anger, a realization that she had let an opportunity slip through her fingers. And Jasmine Crockett, still composed, still watching, knew that no amount of fiery speeches could undo what had already been etched into the minds of every voter watching. As the debate drew closer to its conclusion, the tension that had built throughout the evening showed no signs of letting up. The audience leaned in, sensing that a final confrontation was inevitable. The moderator, with a faint smile that betrayed his own anticipation, announced the closing statements. This was it, one last chance for the candidates to leave a lasting impression. Karoline Leavitt adjusted her microphone and sat up straight, masking the bruises her earlier mistakes had inflicted on her confidence. She knew the eyes of the nation were still locked on her, waiting to see if she would stumble again or somehow salvage her night. Karoline took a breath and launched into her closing remarks. Tonight has been a clear demonstration of two competing visions for America, she began, her voice strong, steady. She spoke about patriotism, about family values, about the importance of fighting government overreach. Every word was meticulously chosen, carefully crafted to appeal to her base and project an image of resilience. But despite her polished delivery, the earlier missteps clung to her words like shadows. The audience listened, but the energy was muted, polite rather than electric. There was no spark, no emotional connection that could erase the impression she had already left. As Karoline finished, she offered a tight, professional smile and nodded respectfully toward the moderators. The applause she received was decent but far from enthusiastic. She shifted slightly in her chair, glancing toward Jasmine Crockett, who was already preparing to deliver her final blow. Jasmine stood up, not hurriedly, but with deliberate confidence. She smoothed her jacket and stepped closer to the center of the stage, commanding attention with her mere presence. Without a hint of smugness, she began. Tonight you heard a lot about slogans. You heard a lot about ideals, Jasmine said, her voice calm, almost surgical. But you also saw the consequences of treating our nation's history like a casual talking point rather than a foundation to build upon. Her words were measured, but they cut deep. She wasn't yelling, wasn't mocking, she was simply laying out the reality, and everyone in the room felt it. If you can't respect the truth about how we got here, how can you be trusted to lead us forward? The audience reacted immediately. A ripple of applause broke out, growing louder with each second. Jasmine pressed forward, weaving a story about leadership that was rooted in understanding, in knowledge, in a respect for the complexities of American history. She spoke about fighting for every community, about building a future that honored the sacrifices of those who came before. It wasn't just a speech, it was a vision. It resonated in a way Karoline's recovery attempts hadn't managed to. Karoline sat rigid in her chair, her jaw tight, her hands clenched just out of sight beneath the table. She knew better than to react, to show the frustration boiling beneath the surface. But the contrast between her strained composure and Jasmine's effortless command of the moment was undeniable. The cameras captured everything, every flicker of emotion, every twitch of discomfort. The internet would soon be flooded with side-by-side clips, amplifying the divide between the two candidates with merciless clarity. As Jasmine wrapped up her statement, she ended with a simple, powerful line: leadership isn't about pretending to know history. It's about learning from it and carrying it forward with truth and courage. She offered a small, genuine smile and stepped back to her seat. The audience erupted into the loudest applause of the night, a standing ovation from some sections of the crowd. The moderator, clearly impressed, thanked both candidates and officially closed the debate. The candidates shook hands, a brief, cold formality, and posed for the cameras as flashes lit up the stage. Karoline forced a pleasant expression, knowing the images would be scrutinized, dissected, and replayed endlessly. Inside, though, she felt the heavy weight of missed opportunity, of a battle lost not by malice or attack, but by a simple, devastating lack of preparation. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, soaked in the moment without gloating. She knew politics was a long game, and tonight's victory was just one battle in a much larger war. But she also knew that these moments mattered, that public perception could turn on a single debate, a single line, a single misstep. And tonight, she had done exactly what she needed to do. She had outclassed, outsmarted, and outlasted her opponent without ever needing to raise her voice. As they exited the stage, Karoline's team immediately swarmed her, whispering hurried advice, suggesting damage control strategies, preparing for the inevitable media firestorm. Jasmine's team moved more slowly, confidently, congratulating her in low, controlled voices. Outside the venue, reporters gathered, ready to spin the night's events into headlines that would dominate the next day's news cycle. Inside the building, the echoes of the debate lingered long after the candidates had left. In the audience, conversations buzzed about what had just unfolded. Some shook their heads at Karoline's blunder, others marveled at Jasmine's composure. On social media, clips were already going viral. The memes were brutal, the commentary relentless, the verdict clear. In politics, perception is often more powerful than policy. And tonight, the perception was unavoidable. Jasmine Crockett had proven herself a force to be reckoned with, while Karoline Leavitt had made a mistake that would follow her for a very long time.